This episode is brought to you by WeatherGuard Lightning Tech. At WeatherGuard, we support design engineers and make lightning protection easy. You're listening to the Struck Podcast. I'm Dan Blewett.
I'm Alan Hall.
And here on Struck, we talk about everything aviation, aerospace engineering, and lightning protection. All right, welcome back to the Struck Podcast. I'm your co-host, Dan Blewett, and we've got a great show for you here today. In our first segment, we're going to cover some kind of scary news on an Airbus out of New Zealand was diverted after a lightning strike, so we'll chat a little bit about that. Boeing 737 MAX might be delayed again. I mean, the saga continues. We'll chat a little bit more about Boeing and the amount of jets they delivered this quarter, or not this quarter, but this past month, which was crazy low. And a little weird quarantine run-in from a unlucky plane full of people. So that's some kind of funny COVID news here. But in our engineering segment, we'll talk a little bit about BAE working with Jaunt on flight control actuators, and then our EVTOL of the week, we're going to talk about the Connect Air, the VoltAero Cassio, which is a four-seater, actually maybe larger passenger capacity, so pretty interesting little pusher plane. Alan, what is going on?
Well, it's really strange aircraft news over the last week or two. I know it seems like airlines are struggling, and they are. But I gotta say that the aircraft industry, in terms of projects, has been relatively busy. And that's a good positive sign, because it's all those little projects that get rolling that turn into larger products later on. So things are.
Well, you said you've gotten some new projects recently, right?
Yeah, several. And that always comes, and sometimes it just comes just because everybody's sort of back from vacation. Early August, people like to take off, and then they come back and, mid-August, September, and things start rolling again. It's just kind of like the shutdown around Christmas, and January is always chaos. Mid-January is. So some positive things going on out there.
Well, that's good. That's good news for sure. Everyone wants to get back to work, and you see good people get rehired, and the industry get back to normal. That's for sure. So, on that note, let's start first with Boeing and how many jets they've delivered. So in July 2018, and this is an article from Barron's, they delivered 39 jets. This past July, they delivered 4. So what do you think about these numbers? Obviously, this isn't surprising anyone given how insane this year has been. Yeah. Again, my prediction we still have 4 months to go to see if the Kraken comes out of the deep sea, just to cap off this crazy year. But, I mean, what is your sentiment about 4 planes being delivered?
Well, the issue really for Boeing is the 737 MAX, and because of COVID, there's not a lot of international flights going on, so your bigger 777s are just not going to be in a big production sense. In terms of demand, they're just not going to be there. So the smaller 737s are going to be a workhorse internally to the U.S. and also in Europe and Asia and all over the place. And since they can't deliver them, doesn't help their bottom line. So they got to get the aircraft certified, which it looks like it's coming closer and closer, at least in the U.S.
But it says here that the return outside the U.S. has maybe been slowed. So what's that about?
In terms of just outside sales outside the U.S.?
Well, it looks like the European Union Aviation Safety Agency is still waiting for more clarity on Boeing.
Yeah,
a key update.
I don't know if that's a policy position that they're having disputes about, or an interpretation about particular rules that are maybe slightly different in EASA and in other parts of the world versus the United States. But it does seem like there's always a little bit of dragging when the Europeans, Airbus certifies an airplane, FAA can drag its feet. It seems like it doesn't seem like either side's trying to help the other country or region. I don't know if it's politics or real engineering concern when you get to these levels of international disputes, and the 737 has reached clearly international dispute territory. Sometimes the engineers don't get to play so much as the politicians get to step into it. Could be both.
Yeah. Well, that was a good point by you that you're right. Like domestic air travel is going to be the first thing to come back, and it's going to be really busy at some point. And you're right. Like Boeing has the plane; they have like the perfect plane for that.
They do,
but they just continue to have problems. Like they've got the solution, but it's just not there. So
right.
Hopefully you're right. The 737 Max gets into the hands of these companies that want to fly it and are ready to put it to good work and get people back around the country.
And I thought the Airbus A220 was going to pick up on some sales and deliveries just because they are not necessarily a one-to-one competitor to the 737, but they are sort of that regional jet, new modern cockpit design, cabin efficiency. It checks all the boxes. The A220 does, and it has seen some improved sales. There's no doubt about that, but they're not going to rival the 737 anytime soon. So people are still waiting for the 737, or they're not taking airplanes, one or the other.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about Airbus. So there was the Air New Zealand A320 that got struck by lightning and quickly diverted. And this is really sad because it's a beautiful plane. Like I'm looking at this photo and it's like black with that cool like feather, or maybe it's a leaf, whatever it is at the end. Kind of like some little tribal symbol on the tail. Coolest plane. Like that plane's awesome. But anyway, planes get struck in commercial flight about once a year. So why is this plane diverting? Like I thought it's not a big deal where they just kind of keep going and no big deal, but that doesn't seem to be the case.
It's not a safety impact as much as it is an inspection requirement they're trying to handle. And if you're at a major hub where you have mechanics and technicians to inspect the aircraft, you probably don't want to fly away from that hub. You want to go back to that hub and have the aircraft inspected so they can get back in service as soon as it can. If you fly to some remote destination, or if you're going to fly over the water. So this is New Zealand. So there's a lot of flights most likely over water. Not sure you want to take a long flight over water, and you probably will divert back. It's like if you're flying from London to New York and you have a lightning strike coming out of London, you're probably going to go back to London. Similar situation here. But there does tend to play into the part of there's mandatory inspections after lightning that have to occur. And if you go to a remote airport where you don't have those mechanics and technicians on site to do that inspection, then the airplane is essentially grounded. And then you got to send a backup airplane to go to get everybody to their next destination. So sometimes it's as a passenger, it's like the worst situation. The airplane turns around and it goes back and you're stuck on the ground for a couple hours while they inspect the airplane. But overall, it's probably your fastest way to get the flight completed.
Yeah. Well, in slightly more comical news, a plane was traveling from France to Oslo, Norway, and landed just minutes after a mandatory quarantine was imposed, meaning every passenger on board had to self-isolate for 10 days. I mean, obviously the coronavirus is no laughing matter, but that just seems like, oh, we just missed it. And then they're stuck. And that really sucks. I mean, you've talked about this before on how cumbersome how difficult that is for the industry in general. Like if every time you travel you have to quarantine, that's a nightmare. But this one just seems like they just got a bad draw here. But yeah, funny story.
Yeah, because they landed right at midnight. And so the deadline was, or the quarantine period started at midnight. So if they had arrived at 11:59, they would have been fine. And it sounded like the pilot was, because they're all getting a little flustered there, because the impression was like, hey, we landed in time. We landed at midnight. And the law says no, at midnight it counts towards the quarantine side. So should have flown a little bit faster.
I feel like you got to get someone to fudge the paperwork for you at that point. Like no one owes the pilot a favor. Like, come on, just rub it out. It was 11:58 instead of 12:01. Like, no big deal.
Yeah,
but man,
yeah, we're having that experience here in the States too, where the quarantine thing is coming in. It's a big deal to be quarantined for 14 days.
All right, so here in our engineering segment, we're going to talk a little bit about BAE. Alan, you obviously have a lot of experience with all these different systems on aircraft, and you said one of the cool parts of your job is that you got to, because you're in high intensity radio frequency and lightning protection, that you were involved in lots more systems than perhaps other engineers who are maybe, put on just like wing projects or a little more niche parts of the aircraft. So tell me a little bit about what BAE is doing with these fly-by-wire tests on eVTOLs.
So as you know, as we get to more electric aircraft and the aircraft gets smaller, that means all the associated components are going to get smaller and lighter and more efficient. And companies like BAE, who are making actuators and flight control computers and all kinds of avionics and electrical power distribution stuff, they're involved in all kinds of aspects on the aircraft. They have a ton of expertise and a really long history, successful history of designing aircraft systems. So now that we're having this sort of brand new marketplace with eVTOLs, BAE can just step right into that because they have the engineers to move that forward. And it's not just like I'm just going to go out and design an actuator, one small actuator. They're thinking about the whole aircraft in terms of how it integrates to one another, how they can save weight and cost over the whole vehicle, not just producing a particular component. And that's where someone like BAE can have a lot of value added in terms of a aircraft corporation, because they can come to you with a whole suite of things that already talk to one another and have already been qualified together. So you're not qualifying company A with company B and trying to get the two things to work together. They're providing an integrated solution. That's where
that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a huge advantage. And if you can partner with someone like BAE early in your development, it just gets you to certification faster, because the one thing that BAE definitely knows is how to certify systems. So they're going to really ramp your aircraft project towards a finish line way faster than without them. So it's not just the advantages of having more efficient components. That's totally true, but sometimes the worst part of aircraft design is just getting to certification on time, because when you start slipping, you start spending millions and millions of dollars, and you sometimes can't recover from that.
And what is a fly-by-wire? So this is me being a layman, but what does a fly-by-wire system exactly mean?
It just means it's electrically driven, typically, or that the commands are by wires. If you think about a Cessna, in most people's heads, a Cessna, an old Cessna, everything there is done. The control surfaces are driven by wires, control wires, essentially cables or tubing of some sort. So it's all mechanical. But in this particular case, what BAE is offering is all electrical interfaces, much lighter.
Yeah, and so I mean, we were chatting before we came on air here, and just talking about like the payload capacity. So one of the new eVTOLs, the Volocopter, I remarked about how it's got a max payload of 900 kilograms and its empty weight is 700. I'm like, man, 200 kilograms doesn't seem like a lot. And that's where you can definitely tell that shaving weight from something like this with BAE or any of these little weight savings could make a big difference. Because I mean, you have two husky dudes. That's all. I mean, they can't have any luggage, right? I mean, right. Americans are fat. I mean, we're a very fat nation. You have a 260-pound man or woman in there, and you know they're traveling solo. So it seems like this is really important, obviously, for not only just reducing potentially the amount of lift they need, where they can be a little quieter still, even though they're way quieter than gas driven. Yeah. But also just making it easier, like you said, to get certified and get in the air.
Right. It's all related to weight, and cutting weight cuts operational costs and allows more payload, which is a huge selling point for any aircraft. If you can get your golf clubs in it or kids' backpacks or stuff into the aircraft, it just makes it much more functional.
All right. So our final segment here today, we always love talking about eVTOLs and new technology, and so today's no exception. Let's talk about the Connect Air. So they're talking about, it's a really cool design. The Cassio family of hybrid electric aircraft can carry between 4 and 10 passengers, and this is a pusher plane. So Alan, what are the interesting features in this design? Because it's definitely futuristic looking for sure. Yeah. Very sleek and svelte. And why pusher instead of a front propeller?
Usually it's to make the cabin quieter. That's why you put the propeller behind you a lot of times, if you can. It doesn't make the aircraft any more efficient, that's for sure. We know that from the Beech Starship days. This aircraft has some resemblance to Beech Starship and has a canard, or any sort of Burt Rutan-ish airplane of the era where it's got a canard in the front and it's got the propeller in the back. But the benefits of propeller in the back is it's quieter. It sometimes can make a little more cabin space. You take the engines off of the wing. It has a lot of different benefits in terms of not so much aerodynamic performance as it is just sort of functionality. That's where it comes down to.
And so VoltAero, who's working with the on-demand charter company Connect Air, they claim they can get this certified under EASA's CS23 rules by late 2022. Does that seem reasonable to you?
No.
I mean, I know you're pretty passionate about certification. You're very outspoken about certification.
Yeah.
Why not?
There's
why
so
not?
many. Well, it's a brand new design, so they're going to get pushed through all the certification testing for materials, structure, all the systems, all the qualifications for systems. Those regulations are less than what they would be on a larger aircraft, but there's still a huge amount of testing and money to be spent and engineering time to be spent to certify that aircraft. I've never seen a schedule aggressive as that. You can count on almost a 5-year start to finish, or another clock you can put down typically is once they get to first flight, it's about 3 years after first flight. And in this particular case, you have a feeling like this is sort of funding driven. So if you can get investors to buy into your shortened timeline, regardless of what promises you're making them, it sort of feeds the machinery to keep the business up and running. You need that influx of cash and the positivity for the employees and everybody to keep paying everybody. So it's sort of it can turn into sort of a shell game because it's extreme. Aircraft is an extremely risky business, especially new aircraft, because you're going up against known competitors. Like you're going up against Honda. Like, really? Honda has infinite funds compared to you. Or you're going up against an Airbus, or you're going up against a Textron or Bell or somebody. Those companies have been around forever and they have the resources to crush you. So anything that you do is going to, if it has a positive influence on the market, like if you're changing things in the marketplace, don't expect everybody else to sit on their backside and watch you do it. They're going to take those designs, incorporate into what they already have, and beat you at your own game. So it's a very, very tough marketplace. And what they're trying to do with saying they're going to certify by 2022 it basically says we're going to beat our competitors to this design milestone because we're just faster. All the best, right? All the best. I haven't seen it really ever happen. So, keep it with, take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah. Well, in this design, I mean, it says they're hoping it can fly up to 800 miles.
Yeah.
At a speed around 200 knots, which that's pretty
not
slow. So that's going to take.
It's not jet,
it's going to take
right.
some time, but
yeah, it's a turbo. It's basically turboprop speeds. Yeah. Well, it's electric too.
Yeah, and if that gets you from, say, New York to Chicago, that's going to be what, 4 or 5 hour flight instead of maybe a 2 hour flight. It's about a 2 hour flight from the East Coast to Chicago.
Yeah,
right?
so it'd be about a 4 hour flight, and at those speeds, yeah, roughly, yeah.
And we haven't seen too many in the electric sector here as we've been kind of reviewing these and going through them. That are really interested in this market, where that's a pretty good distance. Most of these, I mean, a lot of them have been thinking about heading over to Jim's house down the street, in your copter, right? And then others are like, well, we'll cut down like a 3 hour drive into a 45-minute flight,
right? And
now this one seems like it's an even much more long distance. I mean, does that seem reasonable that electric vehicles will be able to do that in the near future? It seems like the technology isn't there, but I don't know.
It depends on where the application is. I heard a good discussion today dealing with every aircraft is not going to fit every potential marketplace or every particular demand. So it's a very niche market. The segmentation, it can be very clear. Years ago, the the Eclipse aircraft out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. That little twin-engine jet had a lot of use down in Florida, going from southern Florida to Miami up to northern Florida, Jacksonville or someplace like that. So it just from going across the state, it was a very useful aircraft, and it had its own separate little marketplace there. California's going to be that way. There's parts of the U.S. and parts of Europe the same way, where there's a marketplace where 100 miles, 200 miles is a pretty good sweet spot for making relatively short flights that are much faster than driving. And so there's a marketplace there. What they're not going to do is they're not going to fly New York to Los Angeles in this thing. That will not be their marketplace. So finding that market segmentation and finding that sweet spot will be key to success here.
Yeah, and just two more little interesting things. Number one, their propulsion system is a combination. So it's an internal combustion engine that drives three 60-kilowatt electric motors. So they say the quieter electric ones will be used for takeoff and landing, and then the engine can extend range. How do you feel about that?
It's a stepping stone. I just think it's a stepping stone. There's no efficiency.
Electric's just not quite there yet. Yeah.
Right, and when it is there, they can switch it over. So if you can I had this discussion with a client yesterday about get the product out and get it in service, build your customer base, and then get to the next generation. Because it's more important to have something out in service and flying and productive than waiting for the ultimate in battery power to appear. That's not likely to happen in the next 6 months. So it's better to be selling product than waiting to sell product. This has that feel.
Yeah, and they're going to allow users to book flights directly from a smartphone app from whatever airfield is nearest to them. So kind of, again, going into that like air taxi sort of feel, but for a longer distance. So pretty interesting. I mean, as far as like, all the different electric vehicles we've kind of talked about, reviewed, whatever you would want to call it, this one's definitely like a quirky, different in between all the different ideas and different designs, and definitely it's got its own seeming niche here.
So the one key about all the electrics when we get to that point is that it's going to offer up new opportunities to fill different marketplaces. And you're going to, I think what you're going to see, and we went to the Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio last summer and walked through it. And one of the key things that as you walk through that museum, because it kind of goes from the dawn of flight to today, is the power plant changes everything. So aircraft design is based on the power plant. And we are creating electric power plants now. We're in the early phases of that. Aircraft will evolve with those power plants. And we're going to see new opportunities arise in the aircraft market to fill other places that we couldn't satisfy before, because the power plant will let us do it. That's where I think the opportunities lie, is understanding where those new marketplaces are going to pop out, because the power plant's going to let us do it.
All right. Well, that'll do it for today's episode of Struck. If you're new to the show, thank you so much for listening, and please leave a review and subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Check out the WeatherGuard Lightning Tech YouTube channel for video episodes, full interviews, and short clips from the show. And follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Our handle is @WGLightning. Tune in next Tuesday for another great episode on aviation, aerospace engineering, and lightning protection. Strike Tape, WeatherGuard Lightning Tech's proprietary lightning protection for radomes, provides unmatched durability for years to come. If you need help with your radome lightning protection, reach out to us at weatherguardaero.com. That's weatherguardaero.com.